Long before he was known as the father of three world religions, Abram lived in Ur of the Chaldeans. It was a thriving, self-centered metropolis in the ancient world, boasting advanced architecture, like these massive mud brick structures, and a highly comfortable way of life. Looking at this map of his route to Canaan, we can see exactly what he was asked to abandon. God told Abram to leave his secure homeland and travel roughly 1,000 miles on foot into unknown territory, promising to make his descendants into a great nation. But reading closely, there is a glaring biological roadblock right at the start of this journey. Abram is 75 years old, and as Genesis 11:30 plainly states, his wife Sarai cannot have children. He packs up his family and goes anyway. This initial step of obedience marks him as a man of profound belief, though human nature remains. When forced to wait years for a seemingly impossible outcome, a person has to make a choice: either trust the invisible promises of God or pivot, take control, and try to force the outcome themselves. Almost the moment Abram arrives in the Promised Land, a severe famine strikes. The ground dries up, the food disappears, and his reliance on God's provision faces an immediate physical test. Panic sets in. He abandons Canaan and flees south to the safety and intimidating cower of Egypt. Fearing the Egyptians will kill him to take his beautiful wife, Abram lies, telling them Sarai is his sister. Pharaoh takes Sarai into his palace, and Abram's self-serving lie nearly destroys the very family line God promised to bless. When faced with sudden obstacles, our instinct is to seize control and protect ourselves. Acting out of self-preservation usually just multiplies the danger. Abram and his nephew, Lot, eventually leave Egypt with immense wealth. But their massive flocks quickly outgrow the land, and their herdsmen begin fighting over the limited water and pasture. This time, Abram tries a different approach. He relinquishes control, giving his younger nephew the first choice of the surrounding territory to settle the dispute. As we read here in Lot's character profile, his tendency was to choose the easiest course. He sees the well-watered plains of the Jordan Valley and chooses based on outward appearance, moving his tents near a city entrenched in corruption. That decision places Lot squarely in the path of judgment. He loses everything when Sodom is ultimately destroyed, leaving behind nothing but the desolate, salt-crusted wasteland of the Dead Sea. Lot drifts into disaster by chasing what looks good on the surface, while Abram is slowly learning the value of trusting God's unseen provision over his own immediate desires. But trusting the unseen gets harder as the years drag on. A decade passes. Abram and Sarai are aging, and there is still no child in sight. The weight of that delay pushes Sarai to her breaking point. As noted in her profile, she attempts to work the problem out on her own without consulting God. She instructs Abram to sleep with her Egyptian servant, Hagar, to manufacture an heir. Taking a servant as a surrogate was a perfectly normal cultural practice at the time, but spiritually, it was a massive compromise of God's highly specific promise to provide a son through Sarai. The fallout in the household is immediate and toxic. This note on Hagar points out that her pregnancy sparked intense feelings of pride. She looks down on Sarai. Sarai responds with harsh abuse, and Hagar eventually flees into the desert. Despite their failure, God steps in. He finds Hagar, protects her and her son Ishmael, and years later finally fulfills the birth of Isaac to Sarai on his own timeline. Forcing the timeline only invited jealousy and fractured the family. Decades later, the ultimate test arrives. God directs Abraham to Mount Moriah, the same rocky elevation where the city of Jerusalem would eventually stand. Reading the text of Genesis 22:2, the command is agonizingly clear. God asks him to sacrifice his promised son, your only son, whom you love. It is an unthinkable demand. But notice the shift in his character. There is no panic, there is no desperate flight to Egypt, no lying, and no attempt to manufacture a loophole. He wakes up early and saddles his donkey. Following this 50-mile route north from Beersheba, Abraham endures 3 full days of walking with his son, carrying the wood for the sacrifice. He reaches the mountain, builds the altar, and raises the knife. In that final fraction of a second, an angel stops him. Abraham looks up and sees a ram caught in a thicket. God halted the sacrifice once the heart had fully surrendered. Abraham's legacy rests on this absolute trust in God's character, a belief the text credits as righteousness. Real faith is a messy, lifelong process of relinquishing control and trusting that